Well, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Don Mckeag Show. Happy Father's Day. This is the week of Father's Day. And I wish the very best for you fathers, and also, of course, I wish for the very best for our future generations. The times are tough. I come on here now hoping to do my part of trying to bring out the other side. We don't get enough of the other side. No matter what your opinions are, we need both sides of every situation, I believe, more than ever. We have an imbalance, and it is showing, and it is really affecting so many of our young people. Those who watch this show regularly, and thank you, I hear from you in the supermarkets, and I hear from you down in Plymouth, so I know it's being watched. And I do appreciate those who mention it. You do also a radio show that I've been doing over 20 years on Cape Cod, WXTK. I also substituted a couple of times for Howie Carr, so right away, you know I am a conservative. What you don't know, unless you followed me regularly, is that I was a John Fitzgerald Kennedy Democrat for most of my political years. I am apolitical now because both parties, I believe, are out of control. I don't believe they represent you and I any longer. I believe that there has been a separation, not just recently either. I just think it's coming to a head because we have such an outrageous goings on with a person who just refuses to be part of the establishment, and the establishment can't stand it. Reminds me sometimes, I've been in clubs, I've gone to Palm Beach. I was very successful at one time and quite wealthy at one time. And I say this only because I want to reflect to you, or I should say, pass on to you, that it is a whole different world, that 80% of this population truly has no idea about. The value systems aren't like ours. Doesn't mean there aren't good people. It's not about a moral issue. It's about what their life entails. They don't have to worry about money, of course, until there's a major stock market crash. But they have been, in many cases, generationally, absolutely immune to financial worries, unlike most of us that have come up through middle-class America or lower wealthy. But it is a very necessary thing, I think, for people to at least be aware that those people in government, this has been the history of government, by the way. I believe we are absolutely in the same path that Rome was, Egypt, every great country that was great because of laws, that was great because of hard-working people and of powerful armies. Every single one of them has been defeated from within. And we, unfortunately, are experiencing this. Before I get on to trying to connect some of the dots, and by the way, my radio station is, it'll be tomorrow, today's Friday, but every Saturday on 95.1 FM, WXTK on Cape Cod, and you may call in. Unfortunately, we can't have call-ins here, but this gives you an opportunity, unlike newspapers. Yeah, you can write a letter to the editor, but who's to say whether they're going to publish it or not? The other thing is that when you have a chance to call in, you can honestly vent your positives and negatives on what the host is talking about. And I find that something sadly lacking. Try to get your congressman. Try to get your senator. Half the time, try to get your superintendent of schools. It is a difficult thing, this thing called communication. But I mentioned the radio so that you can call between 11 and 1 every Saturday and give me your views, pro or con, and that's what I'm there for. Now, I'm wearing a tie that's an American flag tie. And those that have been watching this, we've been doing it over 2 years. And I miss my buddy Kenny Bukes, who's gone through an illness, but he's coming out of it well. But Richard and the crew here, it's a wonderful, wonderful facility, and they're doing a great job. Dylan's on the camera today. But come by. It's in the, I guess we're still covered here, aren't we? But it's in the Honeydew Donut Mall area where Cornerstones is. And stop in and see this beautiful facility, and they'll be happy to see you. Anyway, this tie that I'm wearing today is a different one than I normally wear for those that have been watching the show for a couple of years. And I wear it to represent everyone. I'm a conservative. I make no bones about it, and I base my opinions on experience. I've been a school teacher and coach. I've been a restaurant owner, big restaurant. I've been an entertainer. I've done a lot of traveling. I've run for office. I ran for state rep in 2000. Defeated. I ran as a Republican. I was asked to run. I know what it's all about to run in the political world, and believe me, it is no bargain. I also wrote a book, and I had some friends today say, you better mention it. You never mention it. I mentioned it on the radio, but it's called, and I didn't bring one, I usually do, that we can show the cover, but it's called, Well, At Least I Owned a Rolls Royce. That's Irish for the ups and downs of life. And I just thought I'd mention that if you're interested for Father's Day, it is available at O'Donovan's beautiful Irish store down on Main Street, but also at Titcomb's, at Booksmith Music Smith, Market Street Books by the Sea. And I can't remember, actually, we don't have sponsors, but if you'd like the book, it's light reading, and it's the husbands might like to read it. This tie, as I mentioned, is black in the back because it is, to me, extremely sad. I'm in my 70s. I've seen it all a lot. I thought I had. But I never thought I'd ever see what's going on now. It isn't about a criticism. When you have colleges now, college students, attacking a duly elected president. You don't have to like the president. I didn't like Obama. I didn't like his policies. I believe his 8 years have not been a positive for this country. That being said, I supported him as the president. I never thought I would live to see the day where colleges, never mind groups out there, too many of them with too much time on their hands, picketing. Picketing's one thing. That is a freedom of speech. But when you start beating people up, smashing cars, and then shooting people, there's got to be a stop put to it. And the big problem is the power behind the negative is the press. And the press is biased. And no one with an honest mind, Democrat, liberal, conservative, Republican, independent, can honestly say that what's going on bodes well for our young people. That's why I mentioned Father's Day and these young people going to college and coming out of colleges. When you have college professors, when I was in school, and your parents, a lot of them, every single school would have a picture of the then president on the wall. And they would have a flag in a flagpole standing on the, in the auditorium, on the stage. Many of them had them in flags in the classroom. This is America. Today, we've got people putting up effigies of a sitting president in a classroom. It is really sad. And one of the things that I wanted to mention that I have before, but I constantly want to remind you, because it's so sad. In 1887, a Scottish professor named Alexander Tytler. Now imagine, 1887. I didn't have modern math, so I can figure this out without having to have a calculator. I wonder how many kids today can. Can you figure out how many years that is to put Dylan? I'm putting him on 1887 to 2017.
1887.
Yep. 113 plus 17, right? 87 is 13. That brings up to 1900. So 1900 to 2000 is 100. So you got 113 plus 17. So it's 130. That's right. 130 years. Now, here's what he said. He was a professor at the University of Edinburgh. And he was an expert in the Athenian governments, which of course was we've all seen the movies and the Spartans and the demise of Athens, because they got away from protecting themselves. They got more into the intellectual community and less into recognizing that enemies are out there that will physically take what you have. But he said, a democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a government. How many years did we say again, Dylan? Just now, 200 and 30 years.
30, yeah.
Pardon me, 130, but so now it simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. This is public employees. FDR, the darling of the Democratic Party, rightly so, did a lot of wonderful things. But what really bailed us out, unfortunately, was World War II. My grandparents went through that terrible crash in 1929, and America was flat broke. But here's what history tells us. When voters decide and find that they can vote for the people who will get them raises no matter what, FDR was dead against public employee unions. Now, there are those out there who don't like hearing this. But remember, I was a teacher all these years, 13 years. The paycheck for public employees is supposed to reflect not what they're worth. It reflects people who have always determined they were going to make less money, but they were doing community service. They were working for their neighbors. They were also given benefits to offset the pay differential. And in many cases, their vacation time was far superior than the private sector. But once they were unionized, I saw this in teaching. It was a different ballgame. But we won't go into there. But here is what the professor said. From the moment people recognize that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury, you see the difference. And our young people aren't taught this because, of course, education doesn't want the young people to know this. And they don't. They don't know what socialism is. They don't know what communism is, except in some selected classrooms by the good teachers that are still out there, despite the curriculum masters that have ruined education in so many ways. They've soft-pedaled it, focused on things away from our real history. But when you start getting people voting specifically for the person they think they're going to get more money from, regardless of the person's ability, or vote for just one political party because they represent your union, the society begins to crumble. The public treasury, when every democracy, will finally collapse over loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. Now, you think we can't have that happen? Oh, most certainly you can. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. So we were 1777, so here we are now, right, Dylan? It's an even number. We're at 2017, so way over 200. During these 200 years, these nations always progress through the following sequence: from bondage to spiritual faith. Now remember, if you're not being taught how the Pilgrims, what they did, how they suffered, and how religious they were, if all of a sudden we have a group of people running the Democratic Party, which I firmly believe we have, who diminish the power of a divine God, no matter what God you choose, a divine power, the minute you no longer include that as part of the foundation and the forming of this great country, we all are losing. So it goes from bondage, which is what so many came to this country from, to spiritual faith. From spiritual faith to great courage. That's when we had the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War. From liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, and from complacency to apathy, which is where we are now. We're apathetic. Too many people having it too easy. Too many people not working, and as the Bible says, idle hands are the devil's workshop. That's what we've gotten from today's welfare state. EBT cards. People here illegally being given money when we have young, I go to Dunkin' Donuts and other places, these hard-working young girls and guys, they're out there. They have to take money, have money taken out of their check for Social Security. The owners of the shops have to match that. Now they have to pay insurance, which I never did when we were their age, because the insurance companies knew that young people, by and large, don't need the insurance. Now they're paying, and who are they paying for? People who don't belong here. And we have a system now, never mind that they don't belong here, we have people now in government, the Democratic Party, and some Republicans, who whine and moan and want to create sanctuaries for people here illegal. It's insane. I'm a first generation. I keep repeating it on this show because I want you to know. My father came over here at 4, my grandparents. They had to have a job, a sponsor, a place to live. If they didn't speak English, let me tell you, they learned English as fast as they could. That's how you make it. Today, these birds that have fostered this two-language and making everything in Spanish or anything else, they're a detriment. That's not helpful. What's helpful about having people who don't speak English working at an airport, who don't know the warning signs, or driving a car? Don't you dare think there haven't been hundreds, if not thousands, throughout the country of accidents, serious ones, by people who can't read English. Oh no, but you don't want to make them do anything. That's not the way it was. So this is the kind of thing that in this little show here I just wanted to talk about, because I have to continue. I speak up and support President Trump. Not because I like everything he does or everything he says. I like his courage, though. How'd you like to be him? How'd you like to be his family? Those of you that are watching and are going to continue to watch, put yourself, here's Father's Day. There's an 11-year-old boy, his son. He's got to worry now because some stoop has been, she never was funny in her life, as far as I'm concerned, Kathy Griffin, I don't even want to mention her, shows this 11-year-old boy's a severed head. I can tell you this, that media, if anybody had done anything close to that Obama, President Obama's kids had to see, that have been held to pay and the person would have gone to jail. And you and I both know it. And they should have. She should have gone to jail. And that's not free speech. When you start demeaning the leader of your country, you are demeaning all of us who voted for him. What is this? Unless you get your way, the country's not fair? He didn't steal the election. This Russian nonsense, they've been hammering away. Nothing happened. So what I wanted to do, by the way, my favorite, I told you I wrote this book, and my favorite poet, I taught high school English, and I do a lot of reading now because I can't stand the television. Let me take a sip of this, Dylan. You doing all right over there? This is a poem entitled If. I'm still an educator, I hope. My fondest hope is that someone here listening can get a little bit of solace, that someone is standing up, giving his side of the story and connecting some of the dots that just aren't being connected by the news service. They are a shameless bunch of rabid dogs. I can't say that any stronger. A shameless bunch of rabid dogs. And they hide behind unnamed sources. How'd you like to be in that position? Never mind, as an owner of a business. It's happened to people where a lie has gone on about a person, and they've lost their family, they've lost their business, only to find out it was a lie. But no one was held accountable for starting it. I always love that. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's a lie goes around the world while the truth is still putting on his pants. People just love, I guess, too many to think the worst of someone, especially if they're jealous. And let me tell you, there's a million out there jealous of Donald Trump. The women are jealous of the beautiful wife he has and the beautiful family he has. They're going after all of his family. And yet the press came out and warned anyone that ever bothered the Obama girls. Now, don't tell me there isn't a double standard. But let's get back to Rudyard Kipling. This was written in 1910, it came out. He was Britain's poet laureate in the early 1900s. But I think about this now. I try in my own I'm the lone wolf out here, let me tell you. I grew up on the Cape. After Weymouth, Massachusetts, I moved to the Cape. And I lived, and I'll get to that later, but I ended up living in Hyannisport, a beautiful spot, which I miss a lot. But I made my mistakes up and down. I've had my ups, I've had my downs, like most people. But when you step up to the plate, as many have got to start doing, they cannot be browbeaten down by this liberal establishment today who just demeans anyone that disagrees with them. It's not now about two different sides of an argument. It's about one side that really will not change their mind. God could come down and tell them they're wrong, and they are not going to be convinced. And you know that I'm telling the truth. Here's the poem. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies or being hated. Don't give way to hating. And yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, here's the key. If you can meet triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it all on one turn of a pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. There's so much in that poem. Look it up and read it. I have it on my refrigerator also. Imagine, if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, but not lose the common touch. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much. Now, we just had last week, would have been the 100th birthday of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the first president I was able to vote for. And I loved him. I loved what he represented. I've said this before in a previous show, and I don't mean to be redundant, but I want to point out some of the differences of what was going on in those days and how people supported the president. When he was first president, there were a couple of screw-ups. One was called the Bay of Pigs, which cost the lives of many Cuban nationals who were trying to overthrow the communist regime of Fidel Castro. Jack Kennedy took the blame, even though there were other real screw-ups of the CIA and others. But former presidents, Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, who would become president after Jack, but who would be defeated by him, they all came out to support the president. Now people will say, oh, this is different. It is not different. It is not different. When you now can look at people's record, an illegal taping during that campaign, certainly very unattractive about Donald Trump. But years before he was running for office, where is our privacy now? They would never, ever do that. Every single president, prior even to Jack Kennedy, Eisenhower had tapes. Jack Kennedy had hundreds, most of which were destroyed after he was assassinated. Press forgot all about that. One of the things that those of you that are old enough to remember this is in 1986, vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, this was the second term, or the second time George Bush Sr. was running, and he had a young senator named Dan Quayle, who was his running mate. And in the vice presidential debates, the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats was a man named Lloyd Bentsen, a senator from Texas. In the debate, young Mr. Quayle said, I have had as much experience as John Kennedy did, so that my newness to this office is nothing new. Bankston stepped in, said, Mr. Quayle, I knew Jack Kennedy. Now this is after the emotional death of President John Kennedy. This country was never the same, has never been the same since that horrible event, I believe, and I think everyone that both parties have said the same. But this man, Bankston, this is the kind of nastiness that I see, the lack of class. Now, 1986, 31 years ago, he said, Senator Quayle, I was a friend of Jack Kennedy's. I worked with Jack Kennedy. You, sir, are no Jack Kennedy. It was a terrible put down on national television. And Mr. Quayle said, Senator, that was very uncalled for, which it was. However, Bankston was a Democrat. Press for the Democrats. Even then, 31 years ago. Now, what didn't get covered, I became very friendly with Senator Ted Kennedy. That's when I told you I was a Democrat, but I voted for Ronald Reagan. I've been an independent even as a Democrat. But Senator Ted Kennedy was only interviewed by one paper in regards to that comment, what he thought. His comment was, well, I'll tell you right now, I work in the Senate with Senator Quayle. He's a fine man, and I know that his comment meant nothing in terms of his relationship or his ability with my brother. How many of you out there that are in my bracket or younger have ever seen that discussed? Here's the brother of the president, a very strong Democrat himself. He couldn't come out and level the guy. But that's what we used to have. But again, the press has never wanted to put out a fire when it is a Republican that seems to be in trouble. I was looking up this guy, I don't know if you remember, Obama's first Secretary of the Treasury. What they're doing now with all of this nonsense going on is they're, of course, trying to get at Donald Trump's tax records. Now, he's already the president, legally, duly elected. I have a huge resentment against liberals, against people in this state, or anyone else that takes away my right to vote. And they do by not accepting this person who is in the White House. Jack Kennedy, if you read it up, I believe his father was extremely wealthy. And there's evidence all over the place, written about, talked about for all these years, that the father was so powerful, so wealthy, and so attached to the press. Very close friends with William Randolph Hearst. That election was bought. Parts of Chicago and West Virginia, and he only won by less than 1%. Richard Nixon did not want, he was told, you've got to look into this, you've got to fight this. Nixon, again, a vilified president, but he had the integrity to care about the country more than himself, and he said, I will not put the country through this. Never given credit for that, by the way. And I'm glad Kennedy was there. I think he would have done a great job in his second term. I think he would have got us out of Vietnam. But now let's look at another little incident that isn't little, but shows what I want to do on this show right now. When former Vice President Al Gore was defeated by George Bush #2. And there was this huge outrage over these flawed voting machines in Florida, the chits and all this kind of stuff that were pumped by the media into having the public believe that George Bush II somehow didn't deserve the election. Again, other way around, let me tell you, there wouldn't have been a word. And let me tell you the big reason, if you have an open mind. What was covered very little is, one, the voting districts that they were questioning, 80% of them were controlled by Democrats. How does that happen? How do you have bad voting machines and bad results in your own party's areas? That's one. But more importantly, and I laugh when you hear now they want to get rid of the thing that without it, the country, the Electoral College, without the Electoral College, let me tell you, it's part of the genius that's kept this country together. And here is what would have been said to George if the situation was reversed. I forget how many electoral votes George Bush won by, but he won fairly substantially. Now, Al Gore was a senator prior to being vice president for 8 years, was a senator from Tennessee. His father had been a senator from Tennessee for, I believe, 20 years before Al Gore. Think about how much time Al Gore was in the public eye as not only the state senator from Tennessee, but the vice presidential candidate from Tennessee and the candidate for president from Tennessee. But guess what state Al Gore, that wonderful champion of global warming, another fiasco of misreported facts. Al Gore, ladies and gentlemen, did not win his own state of Tennessee. Think about it. I don't care whether you like what I'm saying. Think about it. All he had to do was win his home state and he'd have been president. Now, I guarantee if George Bush from Texas had lost the state of Texas, the media, every one of those bird brains on your nightly news, every one of them would have said, "Oh, Mr. Bush, why don't you just stop whining? You couldn't even win your own state. Go home and keep quiet." And again, if you don't think that, there's something wrong with you, because that's the truth. And there are tons of stories like that that go unreported. This Treasury Secretary of Mr. Obama's first 4 years, Timothy Geithner, hadn't paid his taxes for something like 4 years. He's now going to run our tax department. No problem here with the press. And the Republicans, they confirmed him. But let it be a Republican. Charles Wrangler. He's been a congressman for God knows how long. In 1965, he did business investments, never paid the taxes. It's all known. He's still a member of Congress. Hasn't paid the taxes. You wonder why I left the Democratic Party? Well, let's look at welfare, which is the baby of liberals and the baby of the Democratic Party and the baby of Massachusetts, Rhino Governor Baker, who doesn't want to take on this nonsense sanctuary. And don't think I'm not kind. The difference between me and a lot of conservatives I know is we give money that's our own, not everybody else's. Just think about this and how idiotic I don't know what we're teaching kids in college. Well, I do know. We're teaching them to hate a president, which is abominable. But intellectually, here is the irony. The food stamp program, administered by the Department of Agriculture, has been for years. Under President Obama, they were bragging and they were proud that the greatest amount of free meals and food stamps ever was given out. This is 2013. Proud of it. We're all paying for it. Our young couples trying to raise a family, cutting back on how many children they have because they can't afford them. 46 million people in the United States of America were on food stamps and free meals. Many of them not here legally. Now, I hope you can connect the dots. Those of you that have been fortunate enough to travel and go to the National Park Service areas, which are beautiful. I went to, if you can, make sure you go to Grand Canyon and all of those Western works of nature that are just fabulous. But now we give 46 million people food stamps and free meals. And by the way, I had a store. When I left teaching, I owned my first thing was a country store. And we weren't allowed to give people on food stamps. I know this is terribly cruel. They could not buy Coca-Cola and they could not buy potato chips with their food stamps. They had to buy milk and things that were deemed, it was a list of things, because the money was supposedly to care for their kids. National Park Service, you go to every single park. You go to places on Cape Cod and in Plymouth, and I guarantee, maybe not anymore because liberals don't like to be caught with their hand in the cookie jar, but every single major park, national park, will have a sign. Here's what the sign says. Do not feed the animals. People say, no, why is that? Some of you may live somewhere where there's ducks or there's geese or something. Oh, I feed them. Oh, why not? But when asked, the National Park Service and the people running it said, well, we don't want you feeding the animals because the animals grow dependent on the free and easy food and will not learn to take care of themselves. No story here, though, folks, right? You even talk about it as cruel. Animals, we can put out of their misery. We all do it. You have a dog and a cat that is dying. But then Dr. Kevorkian was taking certain cases of hopelessness in a human being that was suffering, and he was made out to look like a murderer because he aided them in taking their own lives. I keep wanting to give the telephone number here, but how we doing for time doing? 5 minutes? Oh, good. All right. Once again, I hope you have a wonderful Father's Day, but I'm going to end you with this about all this hatred of changing the Obamacare, which is by both parties. Of course, the Democrats won't verbalize it because the truth, they can't handle the truth that they've done, they okayed, and there were Republicans too. But let's look at the United Nations International Health Organization before Obamacare. These are actual figures. You can look it up. Percentage of men and women who survived a cancer 5 years after diagnosis. In the United States, 65%. In England, 46%. Canada, 42%. This is all they did is the 3 English-speaking similar countries. Percentage of patients diagnosed with diabetes who received treatment within 6 months. United States, 93%. England, only 15%. Canada, 43%. Percentage of seniors needing hip replacement who received it within 6 months. U.S., 90%. England, 15%. Canada, 43%. Percentage referred to a medical specialist who sees one within a month. United States, 77%. England, 40%. Canada, 43%. Number of MRI scanners per million people. In the United States, 71. This is per month, too. 14 in England, 18 in Canada. Percentage of seniors 65 or older with low income who say they are in excellent health. In the United States, 12%. England, 2%. Canada, 6%. Now, the last statistic. You've just heard it. I read it quickly because we've only got 5 minutes. National health insurance, the United States, no. We did not have national health insurance. Both Britain and Canada had health insurance. National. But no story here. How come? We had the best healthcare system in the world. And those politicians, by the way, it's not universal health care. Your congressmen, your senators in Massachusetts, only 100 of them, by the way, 556 people run this country. And those 556, the Supreme Court, they have a separate, top-notch health care system, not like you and me, both Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, male, female, black, white. Is that right? Well, keep getting the same people in office. Anyway, God bless you. Thanks for listening, watching. And remember, come by and say hi to Dylan and the crew. You'd love it. I'm very impressed, and it's a great facility. Thanks for watching. I'm Don Mckeag.